I worked for a small computer company, doing a couple of million a year in sales. One of my tasks was to update price listings and have those changes reflect on our vendors' websites. I put one less zero on one computer model and ended up costing our company $30,000 in about one day. Someone had noticed the error and bought a crap ton of computers. Even though there was a Q&A process to catch these things after me, I knew that I was getting fired. In short, I got fired. I should say that my boss was actually pretty cool about it, but they had to put the blame on someone. He told me I could still use them as a reference and that I could label the position as a short-term contract. I'm a police dispatcher, and one time at work I was working the desk and Toys for Tots workers came in. My boss joked that I should ID them to make sure they weren't thieves. We laughed and the gentleman took the 10 trash bags full of toys and left. Later that night, a man called and asked when he could pick up the toys. After telling him that 2 guys already picked the toys up, he confirmed to me that we had most likely been robbed. He asked if I'd ID'd them, and I said no. He spoke to my boss, and my boss then informed me that we would probably be on the news since a police station was robbed, which was ironic, and he flipped out on me. It turns out it was actually an off-duty cop calling to play a prank on me. I worked at an automotive parts manufacturing factory while going to art college, and part of my job was boxing up parts and attaching a tag onto the box with thin wire. But for every box I completed, one every couple of hours, I sculpted a little animal out of the wire with needle-nose pliers. I gave the little sculptures, bears, rabbits, whatever, to random employees, which they left on their workstation. One day, as I was making one of the little sculptures, I looked over my right shoulder to see my supervisor standing directly behind me, just watching me with a clipboard. I paused, looked her dead in the eye, held out the sculpture, and said, "Want a bear?" She fired me on the spot. I'm now an animator at Disney. I hope that before asking your fateful question, you maintained eye contact with your supervisor for at least 5 seconds, with an equal amount of time after your question and before she said, "You're fired." Because that takes this from funny to like NBC comedy script level. Good job on moving up and creating different, more complicated bears for the silver screen. I was a legal secretary. My boss was excited about our new big money case with a new big money client. We'll call them Plaintiff Smith. Boss had 3 attorneys write a 6-page letter to our client outlining exactly how we're going to cream Defendant Jones. The letter included possible counterattacks and legal citations and basically our entire strategy. Meanwhile, I was poring over documents we'd received regarding Defendant Jones. I was asked to mail the strategy letter to our client, Plaintiff Smith. No biggie, just put it in an envelope, right? I knew he lived out on Maple Drive, so I pulled his address from some papers on my desk and I mailed that sucker out. Next day, I'm poring over those Defendant Jones documents again, and my blood ran cold. No one had told me that Jones and Smith were next-door neighbors. The address I'd pulled was Jones's. I'd mailed our entire strategy to the opposing side. I immediately called their local post office and used my lunch break to drive there for the next 2 days. People at my office knew my mistake. I think I wasn't fired immediately, because there was some chance I might fix it. Everyone avoided me or gave me tight-lipped smiles. Miraculously, the postmaster finally located the letter. The carrier had it in her bag on the 3rd day and brought it back to the post office where I was waiting. I gave the postmaster a $25 gift card and my tearful gratitude. My boss, who'd avoided me, finally broke the silence and said, "I cannot believe you fricking found that letter." It became a crazy story around the office, and I was not fired. I worked at a movie theater in high school. I'm blind in one eye and used to be sensitive about it. I got into an argument with a coworker at the theater, but didn't really think anything of it. Later on, I was going down the hall to get more ice and passed him as he was tearing tickets for customers. He muttered, "Cyclops," as I passed, just loud enough for me to hear. So I immediately turned around and punched him in the face in front of his line of customers. I never saw managers run so fast. Hey, you know those little toys for kids? The little pieces where you shoot off bits of potato? Well, I had the bright idea to shoot off a potato shooter in the parking lot of my company. I fired a few rounds across the road when the maintenance manager came running out, screaming at me. I then realized I was firing a weapon on company property. It doesn't matter that it's potatoes and right guard, it's still a projectile. My fellow supervisors who were watching all disappeared. I went back to my desk to await my manager. All I got was a, "I trust this will not happen again," email. I still work for the company and it occasionally gets brought up on my work anniversary. I was working at Crazee, a sandwich, soup and salad place, and had asked to leave early the previous day since my uncle had died. I went back to work and was still in a state of shock and I couldn't check my baggage at the door. I had this horrible lady change her order 4 times during the lunch rush when I had a line out the door. I couldn't take it anymore and told her to either order or get the frick out of my line. My manager heard me. Before he could say anything, I took my apron and hat off, handed it to him, and grabbed my stuff, and left. I use Adium to manage my instant messages while I'm at work. I'm a developer. I was speaking to a project manager at a new job. I'd been there for maybe a month. She was asking me to do some tedious work that was completely unnecessary because they promised it to a client. While frustrated, I tabbed over to my girlfriend's IM to complain about how frustrated I was that they were making us do all this work for basically nothing. Unfortunately, I didn't tab over, and I sent the IM to the project manager. My heart sunk into my stomach. I saw the little icon that showed she was typing and was like, "Oh crap, how do I cover this up before she responds?" I reread the comment and noticed I used a lot of pronouns, so when she responded, she thought I was talking to her about the client. Dear Lord, I thought I'd ruined my awesome new job right after it started. In high school, I worked at an AM radio station in my small town on Sunday mornings. I was the only person there from 6 a.m. to noon. It was mostly reading the weather and playing pre-taped programs. At one point, I'd play a live broadcast of a Catholic mass going on. During that time, I would crawl into a ball in the break room and doze off, hungover from the night before. One Sunday, I woke up to, "God damn it, Tim, you can't sleep on the job." And I sit up and see the boss who runs the station standing over me with a frown. "But I wasn't sleeping," I say. Just when I think he might buy it, he says, "You have an alarm clock next to you." Yeah, I brought an alarm clock that I'd set so I didn't oversleep. Hard to explain that one. I thought I was screwed, but somehow he didn't fire me. I worked there for another month and then I left for college. I work in a furniture store, mainly in the warehouse. We sell expensive crap. Like, the cheapest lamp you'll find is $100, and that's because it's damaged slightly. We'd received a shipment of a very expensive set, all for a model home that we were staging. I had a china cabinet, still boxed, on our forklift. It was set on a pallet upright on its side, so that was very tall and not very wide. I was bringing it into the warehouse and being super careful. Well, we have a sunken manhole right in front of the warehouse garage floor. The front right wheel of the forklift went right into the dip, and I watched that 350-pound box of wood and glass teeter, rock, and fall flat on the ground. It made a solid thunk, and I knew it was all over. It turned out to not have a sad ending. The lady in charge of damages knew it was an accident and ordered a new one right away, no worries or anything. But when we received the new piece, my manager wouldn't let me near it. Look, I know that you knew about the danger of the manhole and all, but surely it's mostly on your boss for knowing that this problem was an ongoing thing and not taking steps to fix it, because they sure as all heck would have had trouble firing you for that kind of incident. I'm a medical equipment repair technician. One night I was working on an exam light that was hanging from the ceiling in an operating room. I had a bit of it apart and was inspecting the connection between the big light head and the arm that it was suspended from when a clip popped out. The light head dropped to the floor. The arm is spring-loaded and it shot up and shattered the ceiling and 5 or 6 lights, showering the operating table, anesthesia cart, and myself in ceiling tile, plastic, and glass. At first, I was in shock, and what just happened didn't register in my brain. I reached down to pick up the light's head, which is about 3 inches across, and grabbed the arm with my other hand. While trying to put them back together, I realized I'm coating everything in blood. The operations staff came running in and just saw me surrounded by destruction and covered in my own blood. Fortunately, the charge nurse had a sense of humor. I worked at a ticket booth for a water park in high school as a summer job. It was 2010, and so a lot of the people I was working with were adults with families and whatnot, but we were all very close because it's retail, and thus gives you all a common enemy. Anyway, with school starting back up again, I'd put in my 2 weeks' notice. It was a summer job, so I actually had to give my end date on the first day, but we still had to submit a notice. Our company was extremely paranoid about cash. We didn't have any money or cards on us at any time while working, and you couldn't leave your work area at all once you were given money unless you checked your till back in to your supervisor, including every bathroom break. There were cameras all over the booth, and you had to explicitly count any money on the table, separated, so that it would show up on camera. All money was counted randomly throughout your shift twice a day and then again at the end. If you had a variance of over $20, it was considered a Class 3 violation and you were immediately fired. Tickets for the water park were about $60 a person, so one screw-up was essentially all you got in ticketing. Anyway, a woman I was working with, probably about 45, was checking her till in at the same time as me. We talked a lot during downtime. I knew she had 3 kids and was recently divorced. She kept full custody of the kids, but she was essentially a housewife before that. Her husband was very well off, and though with some nice support payments she could keep afloat, she had to take the job to be able to give her kids nice things. She was frustrated at her husband always getting to be the hero who would come in to take them on vacation and didn't have to discipline them, and who had the money to buy them new game systems and the clothes that her daughter wanted and whatnot. She was stressed and low on sleep all the time. She was working other jobs too. Anyway, we were tilling out, and then I realized she's taking a long time. We put our money through a scanner, and there's only one, so I was waiting for her to finish. And I realized she's running everything through multiple times. So I ask what's going on, and I realize her eyes are getting really watery, and she whispers that she's off by $36. Now, we really can't make a fuss, because while the cameras don't do audio, there are still supervisors around. So I, in a split-second decision, shuffled some paperwork around and slipped the money to her till and told her to just try again. I figured that I was signing off my own death certificate. I got fired on the spot when they checked me out after. They took my gate keys and my ID card, a security officer was called and he escorted me to the break room to get my stuff, and then to my car, where they took my parking pass and drove behind me in their golf cart until I was out of the gates. I wasn't allowed to see anyone or say goodbye, so there was no real closure with me and that woman. She did call me a couple of days later to say thank you and how much it meant and whatnot, and invited me over for dinner with her family. But I was getting ready to go back to school for a couple of days and said no thanks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked at Taco Bell. As a background, people generally consider me very mild-tempered and kind. One night was particularly stressful. It wasn't unusual for us to kind of beat on the touchscreens a bit, but I got mad and I punched one. Mind you, it wasn't a full-blown oh my god punch. It was more like if your buddy made fun of you and you kind of annoyingly punched his shoulder. The screen shattered and then the touchscreen started ringing up hundreds of, coincidentally, fruit punches. The girl working next to me saw the screen shatter and saw my hand bleeding and looked at me like she thought I'd just started a rampage and was about to go after her. I got fired 3 times that night. Each manager, the store, the district, and regional, fired me, yelled at me, then calmed down, and said that since I'd been a good worker, they'd let me stay if I paid for it. I paid for it. It took a couple of paychecks to replace the touchscreen computer in 2002. I was working for a faith-based radio station. I was supposed to hook up the ISDN for a live broadcast. I shut my eyes, just for a minute, and woke up half an hour into the hour-long broadcast. I got the ISDN to connect, but no audio was playing. I yelled some things like, "Eggplant sucker, goddammit," and then I figured out that the ISDN was hooked up to an A-B switch. The B side was the microphone in front of my face. A couple of old ladies called in after the broadcast saying, "I didn't hear the church for a half hour, and then I heard a man's voice. I think it was you. And then it came on." "Oh, don't worry, ma'am. It won't be a problem going forward, I assure you." I told them I'd switched my medication and passed out. Which is sort of true. That, and I was up all night drinking in a faraway town and didn't get any sleep the night before. I left a voicemail for my boss and never went back or worked in a radio again. It just wasn't for me. In short, I said wang sucker on live Christian radio working as an engineer. I quit and I regret nothing. Honestly, the narrator doesn't think they would have fired you, or at least they shouldn't have. Given Given that you hear about male pastors getting away with mega scandals, what's an accidental exclamation of member sucking between friends? But in all seriousness, I don't think they would have. Depending on the faith, these people can actually be quite forgiving. Threw a staple gun onto the counter. It bounced up and smashed a hole through the monitor at my workstation. I was fired the next day. I was young and I had just got my full-time job at an awesome company. It was a small .com startup, and those of us in customer support, which was about 5 people, had a running gag with the NOC team, which was about 5 people. We called them the NOC bastards, and they called us pool boys, even though I was the first female on the customer support team. On a dare from my supervisor, Reed, not my real manager, I went into the company's alias list and set up nocbastards@company.com to go to the NOC alias, and poolboys@company.com to go to us. The system admin saw the file change and he saw who changed it. Third day of work, I got a stern talking to. I went white as I saw my dream job slipping away. He saw how freaked out I was getting and said, "Calm down, you're not going to get fired for this or anything," before proceeding to go further. He then called in my supervisor and gave him a real stern talking to as well. I ended up becoming friends with that system admin and spent 6 wild years at that company. Oh, my dad has a great one. He was a busboy at a restaurant and it was his first day on the job. The place was packed and he was rushing back with a ton of dishes. Somehow the tray to carry them fell and all of the dishes fell to the floor with a loud crash. Everyone looked over at my dad. My dad saw that there was one lone dish intact, picked it up, held it out at arm's length, then dropped it. It broke. Everyone in the restaurant applauded, and he was then fired. I was once chatting with a higher-up manager about how a lot of people were away on the holidays. She said she might leave early, but I was stuck pulling a couple of extra hours with all of the people out getting their stuff handled. As she was walking away, what I wanted to say was, "Yep, don't want to have anyone working harder at their job than they have to this time of year," or something like that. But what came out of my mouth was, "Yep, don't want to have to make you do your job." She was already around the corner by the time I got that far, so my brain made me stop talking. Then I realized what I'd just said. But it was too late, she was already gone. I heard about it quite a bit from my direct superior later, but nothing came of it. I worked phone technical support in the late 90s. We had an instant messenger program, but weren't supposed to use it. Only the managers contacted you on that. So a manager starts a large group conversation on a Friday, then immediately drops off. We continue chatting and having fun for a few minutes, but most of us drop out. About 10 of us kept going. After some time, someone invites a few of our Canadian counterparts to the conversation. We're joking back and forth about who has the better beer, how their weather is sunny, ours was rainy that day, among other things. In the spirit of fun, I post the lyrics to the Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song from Ren and Stimpy. It seems to be no big deal. Conversation dies out within about 15 minutes and we eventually turn it off. I then get a dreaded manager instant message asking my name and group manager. Uh-oh. Within a few minutes, I'm called in by my manager and he takes me to another manager who runs the Canadian group. I was reported as making offensive and harassing comments. My manager asks me very solemnly, "What did you say?" I know I'm so fired at this point, so I just say, I quoted the lyrics to the Ren and Stimpy Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song. He snorts and almost does a spit take laughing, and then quickly recovers and says, "Okay, don't do it again. Instant messenger is only to be used for work purposes." The other manager just kind of rolls her eyes, tells me the Canadian team doesn't have a sense of humor, and reiterates not doing it again. And that was it. I got away with a slap on the wrist. I just started work in the field as a natural gas technician. I'm normally a model employee at every job I have, but this one started off a little shaky. My first day, while making a K-turn, I backed the company truck into a ditch and bottomed it out. My bosses had to drive out 45 minutes from the office to pull me out. They were obviously annoyed, but for some reason, they decided to keep me aboard. Strike one. The second day at my last house of the day, I managed to lock my keys in the truck. On-duty boss had to leave home, Drive all the way to the office and get the spare keys and come unlock my door. Strike 2. Third day, no incident. Fourth day, at my first house of the day, while bleeding the gas line inside the house, the gas ignites. Totally burns out the AC unit. This is it. I'm fired. There's no way I keep my job after this. Boss comes to the house, looks at it, looks at me and said, "Man, you screwed up." The next day I was told to stay home, and thus concluded the worst first week on the job I've ever heard of. The best part? Somehow I didn't lose my job, but instead went on to be the best tech they had. I worked there for over a year before moving on to do better things.